The goal is to be able to be aware of it and come back in, and then over time widen our window of tolerance. It just means that I have the capacity to handle my stress and come back into my window. Just because we're understanding that they might be red zone, blue zone, doesn't mean that's giving us information on how we want to approach it, but that doesn't mean we don't approach it.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Steps, produced by Apolla Performance and Turning Point Dance Creations. We are talking about the window of tolerance. What is it? Why does it matter for athletes? We have mindset skills educator Ashley Mowrey with us during this conversation. We're going to be diving into the science of emotional regulation and how it impacts athletic performance. Let's jump right in. Welcome to Beyond the Steps, Ashley Mowrey. We're so excited to have you back.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Ashley, when you say be here, we're fortunate to have had you for 6 seasons now. All 6 of our seasons you have been on the show. And this topic is something you're seeing more and more. It's becoming more and more relevant as you work with more young performance athletes, coaches, and parents. So for those who might be hearing it for the first time, what exactly is the window of tolerance and why is it important to athletes?
So the window of tolerance is a concept created by Dr. Dan Siegel. He's a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist, and he created this to show what our nervous system is doing when we have automatic stress responses. And so the window of tolerance is what it sounds like. You can picture that we all have a window where we are tolerant of things, of stress. And within that window, we feel focused and clear. We can have boundaries. We can make healthy decisions. We can problem solve. It doesn't mean that everything's like perfect and calm, but we can cope with whatever is happening. And then we can edge out of our window. And that's when our stress response in our nervous system gets triggered. And so then he talks about different zones that we can go into when we get out of our window. And I think it's really important. This is actually one of my favorite topics to use with dancers, athletes, parents, and coaches, because I have found that so many, like once we talk about the window and like the different zones, everybody goes, yes, I've experienced that. Like everybody experiences this. Everybody has these stress responses. They're automatic in us. And so it gives some language and gives some context to help like visualize it and be able to name what's happening, which helps us feel more in control of it, which helps us feel like we can cope with it better.
So I know in this episode, we're going to talk about being inside and outside of the window of tolerance, but especially in this really strange time that we're all in, the world feels a little bit crazy. Does the window shrink? Does the window of tolerance get smaller at times? Because it seems like everyone's window of tolerance, and I will put myself in the box, is a little bit smaller than it maybe normally should be. So does that happen?
It does. You are so right, Bree. That does happen. So a couple of things about the size of the window. One is that everybody's window is a different size. The size of your window really depends on a lot of things: genetics, your environment, your upbringing, trauma, the stress that you've been through. It depends on a lot of different things. And then also your size of your window can change throughout the day, every day. Stress and trauma narrow the window. And so anytime, and I feel like we are kind of in a collective stress response right now in our world, and there's so much happening, and it can feel really heavy. And so yes, our windows are going to shrink during times of stress.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, actually. So that's good to know and good to keep in mind through this conversation. So, how does being inside versus outside of the window show up physically, mentally, and or emotionally for performance athletes? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So I'll go through the different zones that Dr. Siegel has named. And so window of tolerance, again, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It just means that we have the capacity to handle the stress that is present. And so we can problem solve, we can make decisions, feel creative and focused. He refers to this as the green zone. And so you might hear me saying that also as the green zone. And I know the visual that I sent you all that we're going to use also has the writing in green. And so that's a reminder that that's the green zone, that we're in that. And then when we get outside of the window, there's two directions that we can go. And the direction depends again on the person. Some people go into one and then the other, and then some people just go into shutdown mode, which is the other. And so I'll explain those. So in the window, once we meet our capacity, so we're going along in our day, a little stress happens, little stress happens, little stress happens. Once we meet that capacity, or something big stressful happens all at once, once we meet our capacity to cope with that, to handle that stress, we can start edging out of our window. When we go out of our window, we can either go into hyper arousal, arousal meaning energy and activation. And so hyper arousal is more commonly known as the fight or flight response that our nervous system has automatically. So, and we are going to refer to this as the red zone. So in the red zone, we are too activated. We are anxious. We are angry. We are irritable. We have rigid thinking. We are very reactive, right? And so in the red zone, so for dancers and athletes, that might look like irritability, not being able to take corrections, I feel when I'm in the red zone, I feel like I'm buzzing. You know that feeling where you just feel like super amped up and adrenaline and cortisol are going through your body and you just feel like you're buzzing. It's that feeling. And then, yes, outrage. Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Monday. Yes. Um, yes. So that's the red zone hyperarousal. Hypoarousal is on the other side of the window, and that's shutdown. That's the freeze response. And we're going to call that the blue zone. And that is shutdown freeze mode. So you feel disconnected, you feel numb, you might disassociate from the present moment. You feel like disconnected from the people around you and from what you're doing. So I see this sometimes in dancers backstage. Like if there's a difference, right, between like a dancer who's like just in the zone and one who's just like not there. Right. And so like, and you just are kind of like, where are you? I can remember this one client several years ago before really big performances. She would just kind of go numb backstage and just not really have a sense of what was happening around her. And she was definitely going into that blue zone.
Got it. Okay. So the blue zone is I can't hear anything. I'm out of this conversation. I cannot process anything you're saying. I'm too outside of the window. Would it be fair to say?
Yes. And some people will go from their window red, blue, and then some people will just go straight to blue because it just again depends on your nervous system and your history of responding to stress.
I was a blue person. I always started to yawn and get tired. And I'm like, okay, this isn't the response that I'm supposed to be having right now.
Right. You're like like you're in full adrenaline mode and you're like backstage yawning or something like that.
Yeah, I'm backstage yawning like, man, I really love a nap right now.
Like this is not where I should be going. Yeah.
That would definitely be blue zone. Yeah.
And so I know that a lot of times, Ashley, the kids that I have, when I see them go what I now know to be the blue zone, I'm like, oh my gosh, you really just don't care. Like it feels like a nonchalant type response. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that athletes or coaches have about mental regulation in the window of tolerance?
Yeah. I mean, I think you just said one, which is so right. Like, and I've had to really rewire my thinking in this and like how I look at kids when they look like they don't care or when they look like it's just like nonchalant. I have to go into like curiosity mode and really fight the temptation to be like, oh, they just don't care. They're not a hard worker, right? And like be curious about like, okay, are they in the blue zone or are they embarrassed? Are they being really hard on themselves? Is this a coping mechanism? Where is this coming from? So definitely that. And then another thing that I think too is that I think there's a misconception that regulated means always calm. And it doesn't necessarily mean always calm. Like, we are going to go into these red blue zones. Like, this is an automatic stress response that we have in our body. It's part of our survival instinct. The goal is to be able to be aware of it and come back in, and then over time widen our window of tolerance. And so I think just knowing that, like, this doesn't mean that like I'm always calm and even. It just means that I have the capacity to handle my stress and come back into my window.
What about the red zone? What are some of the ways that people misinterpret the red zone?
Yeah, I that's a good question. I think for me, and I'm going to speak personally, like I think I have to really work hard on not misinterpreting it as disrespect. Like, especially from like a teacher student perspective, like if sometimes anxiety does manifest as anger. And so if they get snappy, if they get attitude, a lot of times I have to pull back and go, whoa, okay. And I do this with my kids all the time. Whoa, okay. That response doesn't match the situation. Like, what, I wonder where that's coming from. Is there something under this? And again, we talked a lot, in our episodes that we've done together about like not excusing the behavior, but of being curious about what's underneath the behavior.
But that's a really great point, because that's exactly where my mind just went. So as a parent and as a teacher, even though there is underlying factors happening here, and even though there's things that are going on that we may not understand, and empathy is great and all of those things, you're still in a situation where if you allow certain types of behavior, you're going to get railroaded and walked all over as an educator, as a teacher, as a coach. You can't allow that to happen. You almost have to, I don't want to say set an example, but you have to nip that in the bud before it becomes a widespread thing. Oh, well, they can say that, so can I, and I can get away with this because so and so did. Like, how do we draw that line versus empathy versus this is unacceptable behavior regardless of why it's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So the way that I look at it is all I feel like most of the time, especially with like advanced dancers, older dancers that are in the studio more, athletes that are training really hard, you develop a relationship with them, right? And so you know what is typical, what is not typical of their behavior, right? And you also have team expectations and team culture expectations. And so I think making sure that you have that foundation of a team culture and that connection with each kid, I think that's number one, so that you know what their typical response is and you have that good communication with them, where if they start to edge out of the window or they start to get a little rude or disrespectful in some way, that you can gently rein it back in, like, hey, we don't talk like that, we don't act like that, we don't do that, go take a walk, go take a minute, what you need to do, and then have them rejoin. And then I always say, like, just because we're understanding that they might be red zone, blue zone, doesn't mean that's giving us information on how we want to approach it, but that doesn't mean we don't approach it. Right. So like, it doesn't mean we just are like, oh, they're in the red zone, I'm not going to say anything. It just means it's going to alter and inform our approach. So if I know a student is like really anxious about something, but they're being really disrespectful, my approach is going to probably to soften, even though I really want to be like, right. Like, I want to be in that power mode and be like, you can't talk to me like that. Right. I'm probably going to soften because they need some connection. And I'm going to go, ooh, it sounds like you're really stressed right now. What do you need? Do you need to go take 5? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Do you need to go get some water? And we're gonna try to regulate first. And I myself am gonna try to stay regulated as the coach, as the teacher, because that also helps. Yes, co-regulation. Co-regulation is our power, is so powerful. And so being able to stay regulated, and then you want to help them regulate first, and then after, once they're regulated, maybe after practice or the next practice, or whenever it is, then you want to touch base about it and say like, hey, what was going on there? Let's talk about this. And if it feels appropriate and if you feel comfortable, you can provide some education of like, oh, there's this thing called the window of tolerance, and it sounds like you might have been outside of your window. And and then yeah, just having that conversation about that of like, okay, that's not acceptable, what can we do next time that happens? So setting those boundaries, so addressing it, but just addressing it in a way that is going to build connection and build the culture of the team instead of make power struggles and bigger power dynamics.
So, as you know, if you're a regular viewer, we're big on education and resources for you out there because when you know better, you do better. And we have the STEPS initiative. It's a 100% free course that is the impetus for this whole entire show, all 6 seasons. There's so much great information there from experts in the fields of racism, sex abuse and prevention, gender equity, psychology, nutrition, and of course, medicine and science. Check it out and tell a friend. The link is going to be in the description as well as popped up on the screen there for you. So make sure you check that out. Ashley provided a PDF format so that you could see what that window of tolerance looks like. You saw it a little bit earlier in the segment. So please make sure that you look in the description. That link is going to be down there for you and you can use it in your classes. You can use it when you have that discussion after the period about the window of tolerance. So make sure you check that out as well. You can always reach our amazing guest, Ashley Mowrey, at her website, ashleymowrey.com. Email Ashley at ashleymowrey.com, as well as her social media, ashley.mowrey.mindset. Last but not least, we have 6 seasons. Please go back, like, share, subscribe at Apolla Performance and at TP Dance Creations on YouTube. There you can find all of our past episodes and you can watch this one again if you like.
This was such helpful information to get us started and a great way to put a name to something that we all sort of go through in different ways in different areas of our life. So Ashley, thank you for explaining it so well. And we're excited to continue this conversation with you. In our next conversation, we're going to dive deeper into the window of tolerance and learning about why athletes lose it under pressure. Why does focus disappear when it seems to matter the most? And Ashley's going to break down the challenges that push athletes outside of that window of tolerance that we talked about today. I'm Bree Zabrowski here with Melissa McDaniel Grisham. Until next week, we hope you continue your journey beyond the steps. And everybody have a wonderful week.